We are. Hi. You'll just bear with me. I'll go as long as my voice will hold out. The Baruch Hashem, like the good old days. The kids brought home a cold from school, and I got it, and they got it. The old revolving door days. So I
no masks anymore.
What?
Masks used to hide, not let you get a cold anymore.
I don't even want to get into that conversation here, but all I know is that I didn't want anybody to catch what I have. So let's just better safe than sorry. So what I want to share with you is another piece about Purim, and it's an interesting connection to Chumash. Again, we don't normally connect. Last week we connected Purim to Yom Kippurim, and this is a connection of Purim to Chumash, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to share the screen. I'll put on piece that I have. You see it? Everybody sees it?
Yes.
Okay, so this again is from Reb Olshen. A little bit. Okay, there we go. I'm not gonna read the look. It's a long piece. If anybody's really bored, and I'm bored, chas v'shalom. I mean, if you have time to work through it, it's really fascinating. But I want to just share some of the highlights with you, and hopefully it will give meaning to the mitzvah of Mishloach Manos. And by the way, like, you should never underestimate, or assume that everybody knows everything. So for instance, I've been doing this. I just finished my last episode, which you'll be able to hopefully detect the difference in my voice between, let's say, last week and this week, because I'm like trying not to cough my brains out on the podcast. But teaching the laws of Purim, and I've gotten so many questions and people saying, "Oh, I didn't know that." Or is it better if I do this or do this? So first of all, that means that people are listening, which is gratifying. But second of all, I mean, people are learning, they're teaching. So this is about Mishloach Manos, or what we call Shalach Manos, or whatever you want to call it. And of course, we say that nowadays, I don't know when it happened, but somehow Shalach Manos became a competitive sport. Became like a full contact sport, and it's like, if you don't have this, that, and the other, then it's like you're not Yotze. In the old days, we took a paper plate, we stapled it to like a triangle to look like a hamantaschen. We put in a grape juice bottle, an apple, raisins, something like that, and that was good enough. But so we've come a long way, Baruch Hashem. We're like Virginia Slims. So Madur nikfu b'Purim mitzvah sheb'adam l'chavero. So here, when we talk about Mishloach Manos, you're actually required to send food gifts to someone else. So look what he says here. So b'mitzvahs hayom shel Yom Tov Purim nitztavenu l'shloach manos ish l'reyehu v'litein matanos l'avyonim k'dichsiv Megillas Esther la'sos osam yemei mishteh v'simcha mishloach manos ish l'reyeh matanos l'avyonim. So we know we have a commandment based on the text that you have to send food gifts, you have to give money to the poor, and he quotes the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch as well. And look at the second paragraph. Ukvar heiru hameforshim, ma'ishna Purim mishar kol hayomim tovim, shebechol hayomim tovim lo motzonu mitzvos hayom shu mitzvah shebein adam lachavero ela bepurim. So normally when we talk about mitzvahs of a holiday has its own particular mitzvah. So for instance, Pesach has matzah, as we're going to see. Sukkot has the lulav. Hanukkah has the menorah. But Purim, the mitzvahs on Purim are created to increase camaraderie between people. In other words, most of the mitzvahs that we do on a holiday are what we call bein adam lamakom, between you and God. Very rarely do we have a mitzvah commanded that has to be between man and man. Okay? So he says like this. Pesach ish Pesach matzah maror, sipri tis mitzvah v'dal kosas. We're getting into that soon enough, by the way. On Pesach, we have all that. Sukkot, we have Sukkot and lulav and esrog. Rosh Hashanah, shofar, Chanukah, neris, etc. But Purim is different. The ilu Purim shonem mikulam shenitnu bo gam mitzvah shebein adam lachaver. So in other words, Purim has this unique element that there is interpersonal mitzvahs that are commanded on Purim. Why? So, and here it is. Here's the connection that he makes to Chumash, which is great. And the title gives it away. Gzeiras Haman ke'onesh al chet mechiras Yosef. So those who have studied with me for a few years now, you know that probably thematically and from a text point of view, the greatest number of similarities that we have in text in all of Tanakh, in my opinion, is between Megillas Esther and the story of Yosef. Both are stories where someone who has a concealed identity rises to be a very high position in power and saves the entire people, Esther and Yosef. The phrases are, we once counted out, I don't know, 45 or something like that, similar phrases. And here, the topic sentence is that the reason why the Jews are punished and why that whole thing happens in Purim is a punishment for the sin of selling Yosef. Ooh-ah. Now, so there we have, again, a further connection. So we're going to explain this question about why the interpersonal mitzvahs. So here we say, the Medrash tells us, the decree went out, and the king and Haman, they sat down to drink. So this is typical Midrashic style. We said to the tribes, you sold your brother. And we know when we learn in Parshas Vayeshev, when they sold him or when they caused him to be sold, however you want to look at that episode, what did they do immediately after? They sat down and they ate and they drank. It says, Vayochlu vayishtu. He says, so too I'm going to do to you. Hadohu d'chsiv v'hamelech v'haman yashvu lishtos. Amar Rav Yisachar d'kfar menadi u'ma im misha machal v'amar lo atem shalachtem osi heina ki o elokim ra'ad hechen hi misukenes. He says, what happened? In the case of Yosef, Yosef forgave his brothers. He says in Parshas Beshalach, you didn't send me here. It's not, I'm just an agent of God. This is all the doing of God. Shaharei ad yemei Mordechai osa onashim mechiras Yosef kayam. That until the time of Mordechai, the punishment for selling Yosef was still existent. So if the punishment, even though he forgave them, and still we didn't really get over it until the time of Mordechai. So imagine if they didn't forgive them. Hare mevur medivrei hamedrash the shorish gzeras haman umachmas chet mechiras Yosef the achshav ba al Yisrael onesh al osochet. So here he makes the connection from the medrash that the reason why that the decree of Haman came about is because this was still payback for the brothers selling Yosef. Now, it's not a wild idea because we say all the time that there are two things that, especially on Yom Kippur, there are two sins, sort of cardinal sins that we can't get over. One of them is the Cheta Egel, the golden calf, which is pretty egregious, which we have discussed, and the selling of Yosef. And that's why the bracha on Yom Kippur, we say, we have this whole long bracha in every part of davening. We say, Ki ata salchan li Yisrael umachalon l'shivtei Yeshurun. Salchan li Yisrael, you forgive Israel, meaning you forgive the people as a nation for their sin in the golden calf, and also machalon l'shivtei Yeshurun, and we atone for the tribes of Jeshurun. The tribes, that's a reference to the fact that they sold Yosef. The two different things, Ben Adam Lamakam, Ben Adam La Chavero, man versus God, and man versus man. So we have those things to atone for. So he brings another proof, V'chein Hevi Rabbeinu Bachya in Parshas Pikudei, that also has to do with the sin of selling Yosef. Okay, let's move on a little bit. In this paragraph, he says here, V'hadvarim, you can see my cursor moving, right? Okay, so v'hadvarim te'unim biur. Ki mazeh ve'amazeh shebemiyuchad ba'usa hadar shel Haman ne'enshu Yisrael al chet mechiras Yosef she'iru lofnei harbei doros. So I say, okay, let's accept that as a given. Let's assume that the sin of selling Yosef by his brothers is still sort of hanging over their heads. It's still there. It's something we have to contend with. So why of all times, why wait until that generation? Why wait until the people of Persia and Mede, the people of Shushan, what did they do that they got to deserve finally the payback for this sin? What's the connection? And further, we have a stronger question. Why would this generation be punished for the sins of their fathers? The Gemara says, the Tanur Rabbanan lo yumsu avos al banim. Ma tamad lomer im lamed shlo yamusu avos ba'avon banim uvanim ba'avon avos harek var nemar ish becheto yumasu uvanim ba'avon avos lo. The Gemara proves from the Psukim that you cannot be punished for the sins of your fathers. V'haksiv pokei avon avos albanim hasam kesheosim maaseh avosem b'yadehem. When they are punished, that's if they follow in the ways of their fathers. Hare she'ein habanim ne'enashim ba'avon avos ela kesheosim maaseh avosem b'yadehem. Children can only be punished for their parents' ways if they follow in their parents' ways. So that's a fair argument. You can't be punished for what your grandfather did unless you're doing the same act. But where do we see that this generation of Purim, in the story of Purim, that they did, there's no connect. What does it seem that they're connected at all to the selling of Yosef? Why would they be punished? You could say they didn't follow in the acts of their forefathers. Now, this is in general a very important conversation to have. It's an important study. How much do we track back the you can't control how you're born. And let's say a person is born into less than glorious stock. So how much do children and grandchildren have to pay for that? And sometimes coming from the most horrific stock. And God has a very, very funny sense of humor where, they say, the Gemara says, B'nai Banav Shel Haman Lamdu Torah B'nai Brak, that the descendants of Haman, whoever survived, somehow they converted to Judaism and they ended up being Torah scholars in B'nai Brak. Or, Leon Trotsky's grandchildren studied Torah in Yerushalayim. Or, have all these types of instances. We had I don't know if you remember this, but we had a few years ago, we had a speaker that came to the community, and she wrote a book, My Grandfather Would Have Shot Me. So you remember that. And, it was like a story of tshuva and recognizing the evil of her grandfather. I don't even want to say his name, but he was a horrible, horrible person. He killed many, many Jews. And she came to atone and speak to the community. And I don't know what it was, but it touched a nerve. And we had such fierce opposition to having this woman speak in the shul. It ended up that we had her speaking in the school. And again, I get it because, people who live with this every single day of their lives. It's not the narrative in my family directly. So I didn't have the same sensitivity. And I learned about it, but it's part of that interesting conversation of how much do we hold somebody responsible for the acts of their parents and or their grandparents, etc. So here, for some reason, the Torah is holding the people of that generation responsible. What did they do that connected them to the story of Yosef? So look at what he says here. Next paragraph. V'nira levayer hadvarim tihine kasav hashalah. So he quotes the shalah, the shnei luchos habris, and he says, "Les diyada lishna bisha kahaman." Amar Chazal, chelek libam ata yeshamu. Dor shel achav hayu ovdei avodah zarah v'hayu menatzrim. Chibur atzavim b'frayim anachlo. Lots of language here, etc., explaining different psukim. Al kain hilshin yeshno amechad mifuzar miforad. The language that is used in the Megillah is that when Haman wants to destroy the Jewish people, the way he introduces their sin or their persona, as it were, he says there is a nation that is mifuzar miforad. They are spread out, they are scattered all over. Now, by the way, mind you, you could take this from a little literal point of view. From Hodu ad Kush, let's say it's from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces. That's quite a swath of land right there. That's a big, big piece of territory. That's a lot of territory to cover. And if they're scattered all over, okay. But here, what the Medrash says is not that they were spread out physically, geographically, but they are spread out amongst themselves, meaning they're so divided even amongst themselves. There's machlokas. So ma asasa Esther. So what did Esther do? Amra lech kenosis kol Yehudim ta'aseh knesses Yisrael ratzalomar shalom b'neihem. If the reason why they were targeted is because there was a lack of achdus, unity, they were mufuzar meforad, they were separated amongst themselves, they were divided amongst themselves, then the remedy is what Esther says. She says when she takes over, now you see that it's 4:16. In 4:14, look it up, chapter 4, verse 14. That's where the turning point of the Megillah. I mentioned this in Shul on Shabbos, that when Mordechai, up until that point, Mordechai is saying, do this, Esther, do this, do this, do this. And she's just like, okay. Then he finally says to her, listen, if you don't act now, he says to her, who knows if this is the only reason why you have to step up and act. This could be your moment. And then she gets it. She hears the call, and she all of a sudden, from that point, after 4:14, 15, 16, and on, that's when it truly becomes Megillas Esther. And Mordechai recedes to the background, and Esther starts making all the commands. She takes control of the situation, and what she says is, Lech kenosis kol Yehudim, go gather all the Jews. Doesn't mean make a physical gathering, because first of all, she's only in Shushan, but she's saying we need to have unity amongst the Jewish people. We have to have shalom beinehem. Harei Mevuari continues, what Volshin does. Demasha Amar Haman yeshno am echad mifuzar meforad, hanu mitzad shehaman yada eich lomar lashon hara. He says when they said they were separated, they were scattered about. Haman knew how to tell lashon hara. By the way, we also know how to tell lashon hara really well. That's why it's the most difficult mitzvah to observe. It's one of those few things that we say. It's lashon hara, but like nishlo Shabbos geret, but okay. So hooray. Ki lo haya mi sheyodea lomar lashon hara kamana shehu yada ech lachkar limtzo nekudas hapagam shemitocho yuchal lahazik l'Yisrael. What was his talent, so to speak? Is that he knew how to find the direct point that would do the most damage to the Jewish people. He knew how to find the fault, and that if you find that fault, the whole foundation would crack. And what was it? It was the separation. Is that they were separated, there was no peace, there was no unity. Therefore, Esther, realizing what was happening, her remedy was, of course, if the fault line was that there was disunity, then the repair will be we have to have unity.
Do you think that's what's happening today? And maybe the new Haman is Putin and we're all coming together to help Ukraine?
I think it's happening every generation. And if you look back, probably historically, even in the Chumash, that any issue that we have usually kind of goes back to that. And that's why the Mishnah says, for instance, there's two different types of machlokas. And this is where it gets dangerous. The Mishnah differentiates in Pirkei Avos between machlokas l'shem shemayim and machlokas that's not l'shem shemayim. Now, the problem is that for the sake of heaven or not for the sake of heaven. The problem is everybody thinks that what they're doing is for the sake of heaven. And what you're doing is not for the sake of heaven. And I'm right. And nowadays, it's not like I'm right and you're right, or I'm entitled to my opinion, you're entitled to your opinion. It's I'm right and you're a racist. Or it's like I'm right and you're psychotic. Like we've left no room for other people to have other opinions. Excuse me. And I think it has been never more clear than what we've gone through the last 2 years. Okay, today's March 15th. 2 years ago, we were in like day 3 of shutdown, of lockdown. And nothing brought out division more than that. I just came back. I was in a rabbinic conference, and it was a big topic of conversation. And it's what the rabbis have gone through is really gut wrenching. But trying to like keep people together, it's really really hard because there's no understanding of other sides. It's like no, I'm right. Like my science is right, your science is wrong, whatever it might be. But like people don't have the ability to understand there's more than one way of looking at things. So that's and so we could look at world events like that. I mean, I don't know why world events happen the way they do. I mean, it's horrible, it's horrific, and we feel very, very helpless because like, what can we do when we want to do stuff? And we definitely should. I mean, we should give to charities, and we should try to help out wherever we can, of course. But we still have this feeling of helpless. But bringing Jews together I don't know if you saw that the piece from Natan Sharansky that I put in the newsletter last week, and that's exactly it. He said, like, that's, who would think that's Venahapachu, that's things coming around. So he continues in the next, a similar notion. I'm going to skip to the next paragraph of Chet Mechiras Yosef. So what was the sin of Mechiras Yosef? Me'ata al pize yesh levar divrei hamedrash to she'amru shegzeres Haman ba machmas Chet Mechiras Yosef. So why is it that the generation of Mordechai and Esther has to do with Mechiras Yosef? Because they actually were acting in the ways of their father, and meaning they were acting in the ways of the previous generation. The main problem in the story of Selling of Yosef is that there was no unity. Brothers literally could not get along, and they wanted to kill, and they ended up selling or causing to be sold their own brother. Kimitoch vayisneu oso. Pasuk says in Vayeshev that they hated him. Ba'oli de mechira. So as a result of their hatred, they actually ended up getting him sold. V'lachein kivan shibimei Haman hayu Yisrael ochsen masei avosehem bidehem shehayu gam heim mifuzarim. And since the same behavior is repeated in the generation of the Purim story, where people are not getting along, they are spread out amongst themselves, they have a difference of opinions, and they don't respect one another. Therefore, they were punished for the same sin that happened with the Yosef and his brothers. V'od shamati lahosef. And furthermore, we could add to this, shechet zeh shamafuzar mefurad ba be'emes. He says it's really this lack of unity, the separation, really is rooted in the selling of Yosef. Kichet mechiras Yosef, who shorish chisar na'achtus b'Yisrael l'daros, k'moshe kasav u'machlal l'shifta Yisrael. Oh, here we have. This is the same. This is exactly the same intent. That's the bracha that we have on Yom Kippur. That we have to forgive the tribes of Jeshurun. Whenever we talk about forgiveness for interpersonal sins, the root of all that is the selling of Yosef by his brothers. That's the chet of Shiftei Yishur, the tribes of Jeshurun. Ba'alehem hatzorer v'gazer aleihem kiliya al chet mechiras Yosef ki osa chet hu be'emes achet shegarm lahem lios achshav mefuzar meforad v'lechein ba'a aleihem gezer zu al oso chet. And therefore, the connection is that since they are acting in a lack of interpersonal unity, that exactly stems back to the story of Yosef and his brothers. Now, here's where it gets a little bit interesting. So, if they're the ones that are now paying for it, why are Mordechai and Esther the ones who can fix it? That's always going to be the question. And he says now, Mordechai and Esther, and this is the title, the title gives away the answer right away, is that Mordechai and Esther are Mizera Binyamin. Why is it that they are the ones who could fix this? Because Mordechai and Esther, they are Ish Mordechai ben Yair ben Kish, Ish Yemini. Yemini means he's a Benjaminite. Esther is his niece. If she's also a Benjaminitess, if you could use such a word, but since they're from the tribe of Binyamin, who is the only tribe not involved in the selling of Yosef? Of course, it's Binyamin. We've discussed this in a different vein because if Amalek wants to destroy us and Amalek descends from Esav, why is it that Binyamin, or it's the children of Rachel, are the ones that are able to and really Binyamin to conquer Esav? Because in the story of Vayishlach, when Yaakov met and he set all his tribes and they had them in succession like this, it says they all bowed down to Esav when they met him. Binyamin wasn't born yet. So Binyamin never subjugated himself to Esav in that way, and that's why he's able to conquer Esav's descendants much later on. So look what the Rav says here. He says, Shuv Haruni, Davar Nifla B'Targum Sheni. The Targum Sheni, when we study Megillas Esther, one of the great interpretations and commentaries on Megillah is something called Targum Sheni. Shekasav, Demida B'Mida, scroll the page here, Lo Batil, Aton Chazon, Achved Yosef al Dezvoni La'ardu Nechrisa, B'nei Hon is Davnu La'ar Nechrisa, U'Binyamin Lo Ishtotef Im Achvei, Matul Kenaf Kamin B'nei Benon Perikin L'Yisrael Mordechai Ve'Esther Ad Kan L'Shono. That's very much Aramaic. I don't know how much Aramaic you'll understand. That's why it's called Targum. It's an explanation, but it's in Aramaic. But meaning, Upirish, kimida b'mida lo batal. The notion of having measure for measure is not gone. Atem re'isem es achei Yosef al asher machru oso le'eretz nachriya. You saw your brother Yosef and you sold him into a strange land. B'nei b'neihem nimkru be'eretz nachriya. Your children, your descendants will be sold in a foreign land. Ubinyamin lo nishtatef imechav. However, Binyamin did not take part in this. Al kain yatzu mizaro moshiim liYisrael v'heim Mordechai v'Esther. And since Binyamin did not partake in the selling of Yosef, obviously he wasn't there. He was kept at home. And again, we always think of, we mention this all the time, but we think of Binyamin as this, like 11, 8-year-old kid. But, by the time he's going back to Egypt, he's 30 years old and he has 10 kids. And Yaakov still doesn't want to let him go, but he has obviously a very deep connection to Binyamin. So, Harimavur, the sin of selling Yosef is what causes Haman to instigate, and he's successful to a degree against the Jewish people. And therefore, Binyamin and his descendants, since they did not partake in that sin, they did not follow in the ways of their forefathers, they were not involved in that, therefore they're the ones that can come and they can save the day. If we go, so now you can see, by the way, where we're going to go with this. Our original question was, why, more than any other holiday, do we have a mitzvah that is interpersonal? Because the whole root of the story was a lack of interpersonal relationships, a lack of achdus. So therefore, the mitzvah of the day is to increase achdus. It's to increase camaraderie. So look at the next paragraph. Mitzvahs mishloach manos keneged yeshno am echad mifuzar mufarad bein ha'amim. Me'antat namshich levar al pi zeh ma shetiknu bepurim mitzvahs miuchedas. So he says, now we can go back to our original question, and we could say, why is it that on the holiday of Purim, we have specific commandments that were instituted to interpersonal commandments, which we don't find on other chagim? Shlomo Alkabetz, who wrote the sefer called Manos Halevi, Shlomo Alkabetz is famous he's famous for the sefer, but he's famous for what? He's the author of
L'chadodi.
L'chadodi, very good. L'chadodi. So if you go to the cemetery in Tzfat, they have the nice big blue graves with the verses there, right? Very good. That was Dina, right? Dina said that. I knew it. I can't see you, but I only have a limited screens. Anyway,
Better that you don't see me right now.
Whatever works for you. I'm just glad you're here. The Manos Halevi, it's a commentary on Purim, so obviously it's a great name, Manos Halevi. He writes on Megillas Esther. It says, "Mishloach Manos Ish L'Reyehu, Kemo shehaya inyanam ki'ish echad lihi kahel kol echad im chavero, hipech ish tsar ve'oyev lashon rimiyah haomer am echad mifuzar mefarad." What does it mean? That od hosifa haprazim al bnei shishon mishloach manos ki zeh romez kihim ba'aguda achas ba'hava avachva. What was able to defeat the decree of Haman? Unity. What caused the decree of Haman? Lack of unity. Hipech masha amar hatzorer. The tzorer, Haman, the tormentor, wanted to capitalize on the division within the Jewish people, so we had to combat that with unity. Harei Shabir, the tam mitzvahs mishloach manos, hukdei laharbos shalom v'reyos. The purpose of mishloach manos is to increase peace, camaraderie, lios yisrael ba'aguda achas, that we should all be one people. The start of it started because of mifuzar mefarad. The Jewish people are spread out. They have a lack of unity. The healing, the remedy to that, the tikkun, is that we have only unity. And he goes on to explain where we prove it in the Psukim. But I wanted to just share this basic idea with you. I'm gonna just stop the share so I can see everybody now. Oh, there we are. One of the and this here's what I wanted to say, something very, very practical. And I've said it before, and maybe it makes sense, maybe it doesn't make sense, but maybe when we send Mishloach Manos, we have to have a little bit more kavanah. If the whole mitzvah of Mishloach Manos is to create unity, it's very easy to send Mishloach Manos to our circles. It's very easy to send Mishloach Manos to our friends. It's much harder to send Mishloach Manos to people that A, we don't know, or B, people we don't like. And let's be honest, we all have people that we don't like. And they're not on the Christmas card list. You know what I mean? So maybe as a practical suggestion, and by the way, this is a great chinuch moment for our kids as well. You know, we have I have Baruch Hashem, we have a big family, and we always, I have the route mapped out, so we make it as efficient as possible, especially now because, I'm telling them they have to go on their bikes because gas is so expensive. So who wants to drive around? But maybe we can instruct our kids to the level that it makes sense. I get it. You want to give to your 5 best friends. Why don't you give a Mishloach Manos to maybe the kid that's not going to get a lot? Or maybe somebody that you're not friendly with. Or maybe somebody that you're not friendly with them, you're just sort of not in your circle. Why don't we do that and explain to them it's a great teaching moment that the whole reason why the Jewish people were subjected to this decree was because there was a lack of unity. The whole reason why we were able to reverse the decree is because Esther said, Lich knosses kol Yehudim. Let's create unity amongst the Jewish people. And the way that the Binyamin was not involved in the sale of Yosef, and we can teach about all that, and the descendants of Binyamin, Mordechai and Esther, were not obviously following in the ways, and they're the ones that were able to save it. The antidote, the cure for what ails us is increased unity. And it's great to have unity amongst the people that we like, but it's much harder to have unity amongst the people that we don't know or don't like. So I'm not saying, and it's hard, I get it, I understand it, I'm being practical here. But certainly for our kids, we could say, you know what, let's save one Mishloach Manos, one package for a kid that you normally wouldn't, pick a kid that you wouldn't normally give to. They're going to be so surprised, and think of the one that'll be like, wow, you came to me to bring me Mishloach Manos. That's amazing. Thank you so much. And think of what that does, and to really make Purim meaningful. So I wanted to just share this. Again, if you have time to read through the piece, it's really, really beautiful. There's a lot there. And also the same idea of matanos le'avyonim, of giving charity, because we want to help those who are less fortunate. Let's make sure that we increase the unity. Again, that's about as long as my voice is going to hold out this morning. Thank you for bearing with me. I hope everybody has an easy fast. You have a very, very meaningful Purim, and that I hope that we could make something practical advice from this from this piece of how we can make Purim more meaningful. Of just like here I'm giving, you're getting, I'm giving, you're getting. If we think about why the mitzvah is even in place, and then we carefully think about where we give the mitzvah, I think can make a huge difference in all of Klal Yisrael. So thank you.
Feel better.
Feel better.
Thank
And
you very
Rabbi,
much,
and
Rabbi. Feel
Rabbi,
better.
Rabbi, just so everyone knows, Rabbi and Rebbetzin Klibanoff are leading that charge. And I'm going to be picking up Mishloach Manot from Mindy Shaw and delivering it to the Holocaust survivors that I meet with every other week in the community, so that they have Mishloach Manot, so that they're not overlooked and ignored as they live a very isolated life right now. So we will follow your lead, Rabbi, that you're setting.
Do something about that. It's not fair to me.
I'm sorry. Paulette, did you say something?
Maybe
Paulette?
someone else. She was talking to someone else, maybe.
Okay.
Feel better.
Thank you.